We'll find out. Sometimes people sign up and end up entering as attendees.
I almost did that myself, actually. Well, we're supposed to have a guest. I think like 3 people wrote to me that couldn't make it.
Oh, well, you only have about 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, we're not that much. So let me see. Stacy can make it. Stacy, Susan, Gammy, and is it Josh? Who else? I should write this down. Yeah, they all have work things. It says Kristen, she would like to be promoted. Yeah, thank God we don't have a vote. Kristen Mark.
We don't have a quorum though.
Yeah. Can we not have?
Oh, a couple of more people are showing up. Okay, good.
There you are. Great. You know, hello, Chris. How are you doing?
Good. Good. Everything's good. Thanks.
Where's my guest?
Hi, all. Nice to see you.
Hi. How are you doing? I'm waiting for my guest. Let me see where he is. Well, we haven't met in a long time, so while we're waiting for the guest. Oh no, it says you're a co-host. Responsibilities. We should everybody should think about what roadmaps we should continue to make. In the agenda, I did put that maybe we're going to have a meeting together with parks because of the outdoors sculpture. Has that ever happened before? I've never been. Sculpture exhibit in Washington Square.
I'm not familiar with that.
So the reason I found out is there's all this new galleries all over Lower Manhattan. And they're very nice. And so a lot of young people are owners of all these new galleries. So they have a committee that is working with the fair. Hi, Minnie Takeda. And welcome. And he told me that usually there's a fair in Washington Square, like an art fair. But this is like sculpture. They're gonna have sculptures, just like in the High Line, for display. And they obviously had the parks giving them permits to do it. So we might have a joint meeting about that.
So Ivy, would that be inside the park?
Outside.
On the sidewalks?
The way I understood it is in the park. It's going to be throughout the park, Washington Square Park.
Inside the park?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, inside, like it's an outdoor, right? The outdoor.
Right. No, yeah.
Yeah.
But within the confines of the park?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're getting
the only one that I do remember was there was I think it was called a wall. I don't remember, many years ago that we had. I think it was Japanese sculptor that came in and he put up his exhibit. Flag, something. Yeah, I remember something.
It was underneath the arch.
Yes.
There was a lot of debate because of the Christmas tree that we had around that. But I thought I remember Art Without Walls used to exhibit both at Tompkins and at Washington Square. Does anybody else remember that? Is it Art Without Walls? I wondered if it was them.
No, this seems to be a new group that gathered together, and it's all this new gallerists working with the park. So I think in the agenda, I kind of named them. They're trying to like figure out how they're gonna, because they're a new committee doing this stuff. Mark.
Ivy, can I say something? I think it's important if this is going to be inside the park. I think we need to speak to the Washington Square Association, which is 100 and something years old association. And I think Mark received an email from a former board member, name is Maria Passanante-Dur, that explained what's happening with the Conservancy and the park. And there was a resolution a few years ago from our board regarding what the responsibilities are. And so there's a big issue happening right now that needs to be resolved. And if anything is happening inside the park, I think we have to make sure that they're included.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that tonight so that we make the connections. Because I haven't done this. So Mark, the guest is in the Zoom, but he doesn't appear to be on the screen.
What the person's name?
Jared Trujillo.
Trujillo?
Yeah, Trujillo.
I am promoting now. You should
Okay.
have that power too, but I'm doing it right now. And I'll promote Valerie as well.
Oh, here it is. Hello. No.
Okay.
Oh, great. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Arts Institution working group. I'm Ivy Kwan Arce. I'm the chair, and we'll have introductions. Rocio?
I'm Rocio Sanz. I'm a full board member, many years.
Chris?
Hi there, Chris Dignas, community board member and member of this committee.
And Kristen?
Hi, Kristen Marting, public member, longtime community member.
And then we have Jared, who is our guest also. Hi.
Hi all, I'm Jared Trujillo. My pronouns are he, him, his. I serve as Senior Policy Counsel at the New York Civil Liberties Union, and I'm an adjunct law professor at CUNY. Thank you for having me.
And then we have Valerie de la Rosa. Valerie is the chair of, what is that working group? Business Development or Community Board 2. And then Carter Booth. Are you there, Carter? Anyway, so then we also have two attendees that are from the community, Eddie Pantana and Minnie Takeda. Carter, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Carter Booth. I'm a member of the board. Looking forward to our discussion tonight. Thanks.
Oh, Ivy, you're muted.
So thank you. So welcome, Jared. Jared's our guest tonight. We got connected with the ACLU. They had a project in the neighborhood. What was it called? 29 Million Dreams, about part of Broken Windows, which was an incredible exhibit. I'll put it in the chat, and Jared, is all yours. Thank you for being here.
And thank you again for having me. Well, first off, we're going to the exhibit and to speaking so highly about it. The exhibit will actually be open until May 20th. And it's all part of our Museum of Broken Windows exhibits, which really just demonstrate what policing has looked like in New York and how we got to the place where we are now. So I'll speak for just a few minutes about what the inspiration was for the exhibit, how we got to where we are now, and then what some ideas look like for the future. But please feel free to either stop me or to ask me any questions that I don't cover in this piece. So really up until 1967, there were only 2 mandatory minimums in New York. Mandatory minimum sentences are a sentence that an individual must be given by a judge solely based upon the charge. Until 1967, there were only mandatory minimums for kidnap and for murder. And then after 1967, that expanded. This is all relevant because up until the 60s, early 70s, we really thought about, theoretically, we really thought about incarceration and the purpose for incarceration to be for rehabilitation to some extent. These are notions of this really date back to the 1700s with the Quakers, when even the idea of solitary confinement was thought of as this way of actually rehabilitating people. Now, solitary confinement, of course, does anything but that. And there are significant issues with the thought of incarceration as rehabilitation. Even before then, and incarceration for who? Chain gangs were certainly not meant to be rehabilitative, but at least on paper, people thought about rehabilitation being one of the reasons for incarceration. However, with massive rights movements in the 50s, 60s, and very early 70s, whether that be the civil rights movement, whether they be queer and trans rights, whether that be women's rights, really just with so many rights movements that happened around that time, there was, as is part of every civil rights movement in this country, there's always a civil rights advancement, and then there's a period of retrenchment meaning a rolling back of those rights. And the way that we see the criminal legal system today is really a product of that retrenchment that started a half a century ago. And so, starting in 1973 in New York, we had the Rockefeller drug laws, which are really were, well, one, New York gave the rest of the country the blueprint for not only how to incarcerate more people for narcotics offenses, but also just mass incarceration in general. So before I said up until 1967, we had mandatory minimums for 2 offenses. Beginning in 1973, we had mandatory minimums for a lot of offenses, for most offenses. Right after the Rockefeller drug laws were passed, they had several challenges, and they had challenges because you had cases where 17-year-old kids with very minor involvement with the system would get drug offense, get arrested for drug offenses, and then would be given 25-year to life sentences. Just these incredibly egregious sentences that would just destroy the individual's lives. And because the criminal legal system is, of course, weaponized against certain people and against certain communities, it would destroy entire families, and it would really have a devastating impact on entire communities. And this impact would not only affect those individuals, but it would be really multi-generational, because we know that being incarcerated lowers your lifetime earning potential once you're released by about 52%. Even being incarcerated into a juvenile facility significantly lowers your earning potential. And so that's really why why we needed to have a museum of broken windows exhibit, is just because our addiction really as a city, as a state, as a country to mass incarceration, it's something that's relatively new. It's something that has really popped up over the last 50 years and was really exacerbated through the 70s and 80s with tough on crime, with truth and sentencing laws and the tough on crime era. This is incredibly bipartisan. So Democrats are as much to blame for this as Republicans, and it's something that is just incredibly perpetual and was really just the way that we did things as a society for so long. At the same time that we were increasing incarceration, we were also divesting from a lot of the same communities that suffer from incarceration. So we're really evaporating the social safety net while also funneling more money into particularly prisons outside of metropolitan areas, and also divesting from a lot of social safety net programs. So Rikers, which is, I think, of course, I'm sure something that this community board is really aware of. And it's something that when we think about policing in New York, it's this perpetual reminder of what it looks like. So Rikers population really boomed after this period of retrenchment. So after this period of introduced mandatory minimums, after this period where we just increased what incarceration looked like, to the point where Rikers went from being a relatively small jail to a jail that just had, over 18,000 people in it at one point. There have been a lot of movements to reform what Rikers looks like. In 2016, there was a federal monitor that was appointed to oversee what happens at Rikers. However, 7 years later, has that been really useful? Well, we know of one of the most recent federal monitors reports. So this is not the ACLU saying this. This is a federal monitor that's appointed by a judge that's saying this. We know that rates of violence at Rikers are 7 to 8 times higher than other jails in the country. And so even with efforts to reform Rikers, while the population of Rikers is substantially lower than it previously was, for different reasons, because of how we think about incarceration, because of some criminal justice reforms, and for other reasons, there are still around 5,000 people at Rikers right now. And it is just, it's the past 2 years have been the most deadly years on record for Rikers per capita. And just generally, when you put someone into a highly dangerous and traumatizing environment, someone who will more likely than not, 85% of the time, be your neighbor again, it doesn't really enhance community safety. In fact, it does the opposite. When you put people into traumatizing environments, typically their trauma's compounded. And then these are folks that are going to be your neighbors again. That's really the purpose of this exhibit, is to really to illustrate for people, what does the history of policing look like? What does the history of incarceration look like? I can, if people have questions about it, I can certainly talk about not just the depressing, this is where we are now, this is how terrible Rikers is, but around proactive things that the ACLU is working on to fix it, on things that grassroots organizations are working on to fix it, and things that most importantly, directly impacted folks. So incarcerated people, their relatives, and everyone else, campaigns that folks are working on to make what policing and what incarceration looks like in New York a little bit less inequitable. I ranted at you for about 8 minutes. I'll stop there for any questions.
I saw the piece several times, and I had a couple of questions that relate to our community. Right now, the arts, like this piece it presented budgets, and when you come in, you saw 2 budgets. I mean, the budget was right in your face. So you understood like how much we spend in policing, which is like the highest amount. The next one was homelessness. And then I think sanitation. And I wanted to understand, wanted to hear from you about your perspective about the prison that is being added here in downtown New York, as we talk about the reshaping of prison and space. And now I think we're going to be the biggest city with a giant prison. I don't think there's another one like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and thank you for that question. Yeah, so New York spends about $29 million per day on policing, and that's just the NYPD's budget. Then when we talk about jails like Rikers, we talk about other parts of the criminal legal system, that number balloons even more. It is probably somewhere around 18% of New York's budget when you think of all the different ways that we police people. And when we invest in that, we aren't investing in things like homeless services, and other rehabilitative programming, and really, we're not investing in solutions to actually address a lot of the root causes that lead to criminality. we're only investing in punishment. And frankly, so many of the causes that lead to criminality are a breakdown of social services in the first place. The best predictor as to whether someone will end up in the criminal legal system is if they're in the child welfare system. And the best indicator if they're in the child welfare system is if they have some other breakdown in family functioning that's due to, frankly, disinvestment. As far as the borough-based jails, I will say that the NYCLU, I don't think has a position. I certainly do as an individual, though. So this is when I say this, this is this is I am speaking of from Jared Trujillo, Jared Trujillo, even the law professor, but not necessarily Jared Trujillo, the NYCLU employee. What I'll say is Rikers, everyone knows that Rikers has to go. As the federal monitors report says, the rates of violence at Rikers are 7 to 8 times higher than other similarly situated jails. This is even with the federal government watching everything that goes on at Rikers. I can't say that things are actually getting better. In fact, I would argue that things are getting worse. They're getting worse in the sense that, I mean, just last week, the mayor basically took out Fortune Society and a lot of the other institutions that were providing services for Rikers and says that, oh, Rikers will do it themselves. Well, we already have people there that are dying of medical neglect. Rikers is just, I mean, the way it is just a completely mismanaged jail. And so, you know, the idea that something that Rikers is not sustainable, that we have to do something else, you know, it's obvious, I think, you know, no matter where you stand, I think that myself and Eric Adams probably view the criminal legal system very, very differently. But that's something that we could both agree on, is that Rikers is a problem. Now, what does that have to do with building the new borough-based jails? I think that there were a lot of really well-intentioned people that wanted to build the borough-based jails. There's the one in Manhattan that I believe is the biggest. Ivy, to your point, is the biggest. There are also jails in Staten Island and the Bronx and Brooklyn. I'm not Staten Island. The boroughs besides Staten Island that are going to be large, but not quite as big as this one. And I wonder what the wisdom is of building these jails without really fixing some underlying issues. Underlying issues, well, one, I mean, underlying issues as far as, you know, what is the use of jail in the first place? Should we be trying alternatives to incarceration? The fact that when we're talking about incarceration at Rikers, we're actually talking about jails, not prisons. So almost everyone there is actually legally innocent. These are people that are waiting for their day in court, and that, you know, has implications for what policing looks like. And there's this idea that we're creating more equity by getting rid of Rikers and having these borough-based jails. Besides making it easier for people to visit, again, this is Jared Trujillo, the individual, not the ACLU's position. I really wonder about what that logic is. I think certainly in Manhattan, but in all the boroughs, there's been a lot of pushback to having the jails built there. To the extent that things could be better than Rikers, you know, if things would be better there than they are at Rikers, then that certainly could be a positive. However, the other issue is that we know all the issues of Rikers, and we still let those issues happen without any real consequences for just about anyone. In fact, the only people that have been actually fired over the mismanagement of Rikers are the people who have tried to blow the whistle on the mismanagement of Rikers. And so without addressing those underlying issues, I fear that we're basically creating 4 jails that will have issues in 4 boroughs instead of just Rikers, if that makes any sense. So as an individual, I'm highly suspicious of the borough-based jails. I hope that they're better than Rikers, but I haven't really seen anything to indicate that they will be. And there are, of course, things that the communities don't love.
Anybody have any questions? I mean, I also want to know, like from you, like the piece that you guys just did, it was really impactful to see the numbers, because sometimes we just talk about this and read it, but to see it like at the entrance, it was to visually see it and to understand it was very different. And I just, I think the impact of in this time of history when people have been in the street again and again, that we are looking at I think it's an $8 billion construction. It just seems incredible that we would go that route. Anyone have questions?
Hi, Kristen. Thank you for sharing the context in which you're making the work. Could you share where there's an upcoming idea for the exhibition? Perhaps I missed that. I know Aggie just saw an exhibition of it, but where is the upcoming exhibition?
I think in between now and May 20th, it'll stay in the same place. I don't remember the address off the top of my
Well,
head.
it just closed because it closed 3 days ago, unfortunately. I put the video so that you could see the space. So that's something like I was going to ask you also, Jared. I wonder if there's a place that it could have a longer or could be moving in different, places continuously.
That's something I'm not sure of. Also, I didn't realize it was past May 20th. We're in the middle of state budget right now. And so like my apartment is just a series of Post-it notes and like aggressive notes from my partner that I haven't actually cooked in like a month. So my apologies. I did not realize it's actually the 23rd. But yeah, as far as having a more permanent exhibit, the Museum of Broken Windows is something that happens every year or every other year. COVID, of course, made things a little bit funky. And every year there's been a really positive reaction to it. Ivy, for a lot of the things that you said is because it's one thing for me to say that, our policing budget is X, percentage of the city budget, and it's this amount of money, but to actually visualize it really matters for a lot of people. For visual learners, but really anyone, to see these things more tangibly. I know that there are talks with the NYCLU about trying to have something be a little bit more permanent. That is, as the person that cannot draw a straight line, like I'm not part of the art conversations, but I do know that folks are thinking about how to make it more permanent. Otherwise, I think that YouTube is probably the best way to be able to see the exhibit when it's when it's not physically present. But otherwise, I'm pretty sure it'll probably come back next year. I can't imagine that we wouldn't do it again for another
Yeah, it's been I know some of the people organizing it every year from the ACLU. It would be great if it moved around the city, actually. So I also wanted to share that exhibit had the portrait of Breonna Taylor, the one that is very visually known, and the artist was there one of the nights that I went. So there's new art and continuous work that people track over time of different subject matters of incarceration and budgeting. So that was incredible to see the piece. The Ford Foundation had as well in their justice work, artist work, invested in this year's curation. So did Arts Justice Fund, which is part of Aggie's Gun initiative investment for changing the prison system. So one night we had a gathering with a few of the artists. So that was really wonderful to see. And I wish it's not like a 1 year thing. But anyways, so anyone else have questions? Chris, Carter?
So Jared, I have a question. So I realized what you said regarding the borough jails. You don't feel that that's going to be the solution. What do you think is going to be the solution? Because Rikers, we know, is a disaster. People are there for way too long and not having their day in court as they should, as is supposed to happen. What is your solution? What do we do?
So I think for a lot of folks, we have to really think about what are some of the feeders into jails, and think about ways that we can divert people from going into those feeders in the first place. Or, if, so jails in New York, and certainly in most of the country, but definitely in New York, are the biggest mental health providers in the state. And in New York City, it's the biggest mental health provider in the city. And so for things like that, we think about responses to homelessness, to mental health issues, to so many other issues that people have. If we can divert people from going to jail in the first place, I think that's a much more productive use of money. And it's a more humane way to treat people. Right now, even if the 4 borough-based jails were built in, if Eric Adams could snap his finger and they would be constructed tomorrow, we still couldn't actually close Rikers, because there's over 5,000 people at Rikers. And on a good day, at best, the borough-based jails would have a capacity of about 3,200. We were actually safer and had better crime statistics as a city when our jail population was closer to around 3,500 than it is now, when it's approaching, it might be 6,000 by the end of next year, by 2025. And we have to think about why was that? Why were we safer then? What social safety nets did people have then that they don't have now? I think that our approach to homelessness is just repugnant. I think that if we had a better approach to homelessness, we could divert sending people to jails in the first place. And the same thing with people that are suffering from mental health issues. Fixing the foster care to prison pipeline, I think, is incredibly important. Again, one of the biggest predictors as to whether someone will end up in the adult carceral system is simply whether they were in foster care. That's not because people who are in foster care are genetically predisposed to committing illegal acts, unlike more so than anybody else. It's because we have no real safety net. For a lot of people, they either age out of care completely at 21, or because their experience in foster care was so awful. And before I was at the ACLU, I was a child welfare attorney, so I represented kids that were in the foster care system. Their experiences are so horrific that at 18 years old, they don't want anything to do with the system at all anymore. And while 18 might be an adult on paper, there are very few people that on their 18th birthday are equipped to survive on their own without some sort of backing. So just thinking about what pipelines look like for those folks. The fact that, again, when I was a juvenile welfare attorney, all of my clients, like the wait lines for NYCHA apartments, the wait lines for permanent housing were just atrocious. And a lot of folks would fall into criminality just in that, because they were desperate, because they didn't have a place to live. In addition, when I was a public defender, a lot of my clients were sex workers. The reason that a lot of them were sex workers is because they needed a sandwich, and they needed a place to live. They needed access to all these necessities of life, and yet they didn't have them because they were failed by so many different systems. Really, the $8.9 billion that we're looking at to build borough-based jails, it would just be, I think, a much more meaningful investment in human potential if we thought about what are the other systems that we've been ignoring. How do we actually meaningfully invest in some of those systems so that we can reduce the need to be sending people to jails and prisons in the first place? It is just, and that we spend the $29 million a day on policing, it is mind-boggling to me that when there are proposed budget cuts for literally every other city service, from CUNY on down, that while we're doing budget cuts for everything else, the police get a 28% raise during that time. It is, I think, budgets are emphatically moral documents, and I think that it is deeply immoral that we are choosing to invest in incarceration when there are actual evidence-based solutions that, you know, will we ever live in a city where the need to jail anyone gets down to zero? I hope so, but that's probably a very, very, very long way off. But can we be jailing a lot fewer people if we followed some evidence-based solutions and some evidence-based alternatives to incarceration? I certainly think so. Certainly enough so that we wouldn't have to spend almost $9 billion on creating new jails that, frankly, a lot of communities don't even want. In the Bronx, there's been a lot of pushback to this construction of that jail. In Brooklyn, I know there's been some pushback, and you all would know Manhattan way better than I do, but I believe that there's been some pretty significant pushback here as well.
Yes, thank you. I was muted. Thank you so much for your answer. And hopefully we do wake up and realize that homelessness is a huge problem, obviously, but mental health, I think it's even a worse problem because people need help and they're not getting it. And I've been saying this at many of our community board meetings to the elected officials that people need mental health. It's not enough to have 10 beds in an institution for all the people that actually need help. It's too many people. So they just let them in the streets. And what do? They commit crimes. And so unfortunately, because they're not in a good mental health, this is what happens. So we need to get behind, and everybody needs to realize how important it is to have mental health. You know, people, when you have a cold, you suffer from some kind of disease, you can see it, you can feel it, you know, but people that have mental illnesses is not one of those things that you can actually see something on your arm, on your leg, on your body, but it's in your mind. And this is very difficult for people to realize that this is what it's about. It's the mental illness.
And it's something where we have some solutions to it. We just don't meaningfully invest in them. One of, I think, the most meaningful programs in New York is, are you all familiar with the Brad H settlement class? Okay, no one's nodding, so I'm assuming no. So in 1997, there was a person with pretty significant mental health needs who had been incarcerated at Rikers a number of times. And, you know, all of their offenses, some were deemed violent offenses, some were everything from fare evasion to assault. This person was basically being cycled in and out of Rikers. And on the most recent time that they were cycled in, when they were released, they were given a Metro card that cost however much at the time, and I think a sandwich, and they were, you know, the response from the city was, good luck to you. And then, of course, the person just ended up stealing from a CVS in the near future, a few days later, and then ending up back at Rikers. And after that happened, Legal Aid and the Urban Justice Center and a few other organizations sued because of the way that we treat people with mental health issues. So that what's now called the Brad H settlement class was established. And these are people with significant mental health issues, oftentimes people that are cycling in and out of jails. And this is a comprehensive program where it's comprehensive programming, where if you fall into the Brad H settlement class, then you have to be given pretty significant services, enough so that there's actual planning for your reentry. And I can say, when I was a public defender, I saw this actually work in real ways. I had a client who had been cycling, who was 56 by the time I represented him, and he'd been cycling in and out of the system since he left foster care when he was 17. And it's because he had mental health issues that were actually exacerbated by his drinking, or his drinking exacerbated, you know, who knows which came first. But the drinking certainly did not help a lot of the mental health issues. And then a lot of the traumas from that were just unaddressed that he suffered in foster care. And so for years he was cycling in and out until a social worker that I worked with was able to say, oh, hey, Mr. Client's name should have been getting a lot more services through the Brad H program. Let's make sure that he actually is. And he was put into supportive housing, where he's down to, like, this is a person who will never drink zero, but he went from drinking like a pint and a half of whiskey every day to like 2 or 3 Bud Lights on Saturdays after work. And so it's something, you know, to the point where it's sustainable. And this is a person who may not ever have a 100% work attendance rate, but he's going to work 95% of the time at Home Depot. And he's maintained that job for 3 years. This is a person who, once we got him services, and once, you know, we started addressing some of the root causes, once he started doing therapy, once he got supportive housing, that he is doing the best that he'll ever be doing. He's someone who was, I would never call one of my former clients a menace, but other people did. Someone who like kind of lived by the Staten Island Ferry and said, oh, not the nicest things to people as they were going by, to like being a person who is going to, you know, like going to work 95% of the time, and who like is better for society and is also better for himself. And that's because he got good services, but also harm reduction services, where he wasn't kicked out of out of his drug programs or out of his alcohol programs because he messed up once, but there are programs that recognize that relapse is oftentimes part of recovery, and worked with him to the point where he is as productive as he probably will, like as he probably has the capacity to be. Now, up front, the cost for getting him all the services that he's in was quite substantial. But over, if you look at even by year 2 or year 3, it is so much cheaper for the city on paper than putting him at Rikers. And certainly from a moral perspective of giving someone an actual life, instead of, you know, just telling someone, we'll see you next time, you know, you steal something from Macy's. I think it's the right thing to do. And it's also better for public safety. And I worry, I mean, with this, certainly with the amount of money that we spend at Rikers right now, we have it for nothing else. And I also, it's why I, as an individual, I'm also just a little bit suspicious of the borough-based jails, because, you know, I just don't know that that's the most efficient use of that money. I think expanding Brad H would be more useful. And of course, you know, it's not a one size fits all. But I think they're just much better ways of dealing with people. And I'm sorry, you asked a question that I started ranting for a few minutes, so I will stop.
That's okay. Thank you so much. You answered my question, and I agree with many of the things you said. Anyway, hopefully that man is a lucky man, and I hope that he stays being lucky and stays out of trouble. And having a job, having a place to live, having the mental resources he needs is what they all need. But many things people say about housing and mental illness, a lot of people that have mental illness, it doesn't matter if you provide them with a home, with a place to live. Sometimes they reject that because the initial problem is the mental illness and not the fact that they don't have a home. But anyway, it's a long, very complicated situation. But I'm glad that we're opening up and addressing all these things that influence us every day as we walk through the streets, as we get into the subways, as we live our lives. So many people are not so fortunate. So I'm glad that there are places that are giving these people the help that they need, and hopefully more help will be given to many more people so that we could have a better society in general. So thank you so much for coming and answering my questions and listening. And I enjoyed listening to you and learned a lot. Thank you.
Chris?
Hey, thanks. It's a pretty incredibly concise compilation of a very fraught and difficult issue that continues to be sort of needlessly dumb because everybody knows what's going on and we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. But to get to a real question, is it already too soon, or has there been any indication that decriminalizing marijuana has sort of stemmed some of that flow through that person to prison pipeline?
There definitely is. And So most people like weren't really going to prison because of marijuana in and of itself. Marijuana was technically decriminalized in 1977, which I'll tell you as I represented teenagers when I was at Legal Aid, and I adored my clients, but at least once a week, one of them would say, "Oh, marijuana is like legal," and it's like, first off, you're 14, so it's definitely not. And secondly, you are being read somewhere that it was decriminalized in 1977, and decriminalization does not mean legalization. But at the same time, most people weren't really going to prison for marijuana offenses. That's not to say they didn't have a destabilizing impact on people's lives. You know, because even going to jail for 2 days, if you work at TJ Maxx, and if you go to jail for 2 days, and if you miss your shift for those 2 days, while you had $500 bail set, then maybe you just lost your job, and then you're homeless, and then that marijuana arrest becomes other things. And so, certainly, like the decriminalization of marijuana, the legalization of marijuana, it did matter. It's hard to say what difference does it make for prison populations? Because, you know, a marijuana arrest, it matters for that arrest, but it also has just so many other externalities. The fact that, you know, when you talk about broken windows policing, the idea of, you know, police being able to smell marijuana smoke, allegedly, and then being able to go up to someone for whatever else, that makes a real difference. But it's harder to measure. And then finally, just because shifts in crime, but also shifts in incarceration just looked a lot different with the pandemic. And the MRTA didn't really take full effect until the pandemic started. So I would love to say, and I mean, I could cook up numbers to say that because of the MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act, this is what happened to incarceration. But I think if people are being very honest, it's hard to, it certainly matters. And I know that it matters, but I can't give you a number of this is precisely how much it matters. However, what I will say is that like the MRTA and the way we thought about marijuana, it goes into a broader discussion around what does broken windows policing look like. So the idea of broken windows policing is if I stop criminality for something small, I stop something larger. So if I stop that 19-year-old who's smoking pot, well, they're probably just going to go like rob whatever store later anyway. So if I stop them while they're smoking pot, like I'm actually kind of doing this weird Minority Report thing where I'm enhancing community safety. And, you know, broken windows policing has really been debunked for quite some time, but it's, you know, still the way that we largely operate. But certainly legalizing marijuana has mattered for that, but it's also mattered to just like a lot of 19 or 20-year-olds who are not smoking weed to feel that they can walk down the street more safely without being stopped. Or frankly, 19 or 20-year-olds that are smoking weed, maybe at a NYCHA apartment, whereas if they were a kid that lives in Westchester with a backyard, they'd just be a teenager that's doing stupid shit. But because they live in NYCHA where they have no real privacy, you know, something that like a kid of means could do and get away with, they'd be criminalized for it. So it certainly made a real difference for a lot of people. I wish I can give you more tangible numbers. I just couldn't. I couldn't honestly.
I'm not doing like a book report or anything. It's just interesting to know.
Cool.
Don't need the numbers.
Cool. And it's the same thing with in 2019, we legalized gravity knives. Gravity knives are knives that like people that work on Broadway, day laborers, other people used for work, but people almost always Latino people were stopped for. We've really thought about the way that we criminalize sex work, and sex work arrests have gone down substantially. There's just been a lot of different broken windows offenses, marijuana, gravity knives, sex work, lots of other stuff that the differences in people's lives are oftentimes anecdotal, but certainly have made a significant difference as far as really the quality of people's lives and the ability of low-income people to simply have the audacity to exist in public spaces.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to kind of like tie an arm to the exhibit again. the Art Justice Fund was one of the, I guess, people that helped make this exhibit happen. And one of the projects that they have, although it's not a New York project, I think what Jared had talked about, to understand and capture why people are certain things leading to one thing in what people's lives look like and how they end up where they are. And some artists have been able to tell the story and really change laws. And I posted in the chat, one of their grantees was this person that was in jail, got, I think he was underage, but he was driving a van that somebody killed somebody, and then everybody in California gets the same, I guess result, the highest crime. So what the story with Art telling was that he had found while doing his time, a place that somebody had left a camera and a manual. So he can only get there after he did all the chores and all the expected things, so he could barely do it. But he ended up making a film about how he ended up there, so it tracks the story of divorced parents being in the street. And then people started coming to the prison when they were touring, and that was shown. And then people in Congress started coming in for that movie, and then they were so moved by the way he made the movie and told the story. And at that point, he was teaching others to do it. So the organization is called Restore Justice, and they wrote a bill, and he got out. And I got to meet him. Was it COVID or a little bit pre-COVID? But the organization to help him get out from the outside restructure as they were doing this bill, so that when he got out, he would be the one running it. So now they have a whole YouTube channel of people doing their stories. So that's the power of art, and being able to tell that story in the length that the individual wants to tell it, in the style the person wants to tell it, without having other directors, from Hollywood tell this is the way. So it's really impactful to hold, like, a lot of people in this group are also in other working groups that deal with social service. So it's good that we're having this conversation. So it's like many things, many arms coming together to tell a story and work together. So I think, like, if you guys check the chat, you'll find, and Adnan ended up having some like humanitarian awards, because he's trying to have the same model in different places, because you have young people doing life for just being a part of the equation. And that wasn't even possible, especially in the state of California, to change the law. So I found that very inspiration. I know that this is, it is not an individual in our specific zip code community board, but I think that, maybe the human service and art institution can invite somebody like Adam to speak about that process of being able to communicate, tell a story, and shape different laws, different bills to have hope. And that's what, being inspired to make changes, because, otherwise we're in the same rut. Anyways, thank you so much. I was going to scan through some of, Jared, if you can put your contact and maybe where we can follow you and your work, that'd be really great. And so I just wanted to discuss with the group, which was kind of interesting, is that the new galleries as well, and that been in some galleries that have been around for a while. For example, the storefront here in Kenmare, they've had basically almost a year and a half of an exhibit called "What Black Is This?" And there is an exhibit that came out of Black Lives Matter, and it continues to be there. And they just have different people they invite, and supposedly it's going to end in June 2023. So if you guys can go see it, that's also, that's that really amazing architecture with the walls coming out in the street. It's a small, beautiful gallery. I think one of the partners there is part of the architects that did the High Line, so it's worth visiting that and supporting them. And in the same spirit, I think a lot of this new galleries are very social justice driven, and I had put also in the agenda that participant has moved to our community board, community zone, I guess. And immediately they got involved in making sure that they're involved with the community, with Asian Pacific Islander, and the safety of them. So down the line, I guess we were discussing a little bit early on about the gallery that is part of the community that will be putting sculptures in Washington Square Park, and they're kind of partnering with Washington Square Outdoor Exhibit, which is like a health fair, art fair, but this is going to be sculptures. They're going to be working with the park as well, the park advisory, and I put the links in the agenda. So I think would it be a good idea to meet with parks? Thank you, Jared. With parks together about the exhibit, that the sculpture exhibit that's going to happen, I think, in the summer. Does anybody, maybe Donna can tell us whether that's a good idea? Is Donna there? So it would be probably a joint park and arts meeting.
Sounds great to me. It sounds like it'd be interesting to find out what they're doing.
Yeah, and all these curators are really young, so it's kind of, and they're the new business people coming into Lower Manhattan right now, taking space. So it'll be interesting to see what they're doing. And talking about incarceration and galleries or museums, I'm still trying to figure out is if somebody can help me craft an invitation for the Chinese American Museum, or Museum of Chinese American. The director just left, so that doesn't mean that we cannot invite whoever is their spokesperson. Carter, are you there?
I'm here.
Can you give us some advice on that? Because you have a longer history of.
Well, I'm just sort of not sure I understand what the goal is, for a lot of these. I was just looking at the Washington Square organizations, that the Washington Square Outdoor Art Exhibit, and it's explicitly says it's not in the park. And I think this has been around for a little bit. I recall, and it goes up University Place. I'm just, with all these, I'm just sort of trying to figure out what the engagement is leading to with them.
Well, it's a new group, and they have a new committee. I don't know if they really even have a name. They're trying to find their footing. They reached out to the I guess the Washington, maybe Valerie knows about it. We can invite one of their, I met somebody that owns one of the galleries that is part of the committee, and he's willing to come and tell us a little bit about how they're organizing to make this happen.
But I think they've been around for a little bit, haven't they?
The art fair has, like, the art fair is like, but the sculpture one, I don't think so.
Okay.
Not that I know. And how they're, yeah.
And that's for that's not the Washington Square outdoor art exhibit.
I
different
don't,
group?
I don't think so. It's a different group.
Because you have them mixed together on the agenda, so I just wasn't sure what.
That's what he gave me, because he said it's not one thing or another. They're trying to find, like, they're talking to those two groups. They're a combination of how they're going to get it done, because those people have experience, but they want to do is a new thing, basically.
Yeah, because I know that the one of the first things, and I can't remember which year when they came back, I believe they were on University Place, going up University Place, and things had changed because obviously the street was being used for dining, and so there was some trying to figure out how to reimagine, I think, doing the exhibit, and I'm not sure where that ended up, but that seemed to be more of a planning issue as far as just figuring things out. So and I know that it went ahead, so I'm just sort of trying to just figure out, do they need help with implementation, or what is it that they need the community board's engagement?
Yeah, I think that's the part of the invitation, trying to ask them how they're doing, what they're going to do, whether they need us.
But I'm just sort of confused, because it looks like it's this weekend, right?
I don't think so. I think it's it's further down in the summer. That's what I
They said that
understood.
they have the Memorial Day show or the Labor Day show, so that's, I'm just looking at the website, so that's why I was just.
I'll go back and ask him, because I think it's a different thing.
Because that's just what the Washington Square outdoor art exhibit website says, so that's what I was just because we have to figure out what it is first, right, before we can engage and assist them. That's sort of just the first step. So I was just not clear what, because there's a lot of different events that happen around the park, and some happen in the park, some happen outside the park, some happen when the streets are closed. There's just a whole variety of different things through the course of the year. So, and I don't, as far as full street closures, I don't think that they're allowing any more full street closures. So it's just a question of figuring out what engagement, would they need the board's help with to do the events. But from just the website for the group, I just put it in the chat. It just, I'm just not sure what they're looking for help, but it does say that and I don't even know if this is outdated, so it just
Well, let me find out, because I don't think is the one for this weekend. Those are the people they're talking to about getting it done. The sculpture, what I understood that they're doing, and the sculpture exhibit in Washington Square Park, in the park.
well, that's a very different
Right.
than this organization.
Right.
Because I know in Rocio, remember there've been all over the years many different things in the park. From the lampshades, that were put over all the lights to, all the performances and stuff like that. But that's pretty regularly programmed with the Parks Department. I think it's done pretty well in advance. So, I mean, the procedures are generally fairly clear on applying to do those things.
I mentioned it in the meeting the other day with Rich. So Rich said that they had approached them and they're working it out. I'll just say is an art committee at the Washington Square Park. It is not an art fair. It's dedicated to be meant for outdoor sculpture. So I can go back and find out more. So we'll learn about it. Then getting back to the Museum of Chinese American, Eddie put in the chat about being backed by the high-rise, the jail high-rise Chinatown former Margaret Chin pushed through with de Blasio. So the invitation about that, for me, I just want to know what's happening in terms of like, since they're kind of closed, but the website doesn't say it's closed because they're supposed to do the addition that's supposed to open up in 2025 in the same location. So like, for example, I have wanted to go to see whatever they're showing, but the museum is closed. So, and until recently, there was a lot of protests. So it starts from just wanting to know what they're doing, to anything they want to discuss about the way the community, the immediate community feels about them. I've been trying to do this invitation, but I've had a lot of pushback within the community board of people that know or have relationships prior to my being in the community board. So I just wanted to ask you how you felt, or you have an opinion about that.
But I mean, I would suggest reaching out to them and just letting them know whenever they're ready, they're welcome to come to the board. But it's a private organization, and clearly the change in leadership is a big change for them, right? And they may not have any outward facing people sort of in the mix yet, and they're trying to find that. And that's generally who we engage with. And it's whenever they're ready to come, because I think it's hard with an organization. I mean, I can only imagine when you lose your longtime director, the turmoil that puts the organization in, as well as their longer term planning. Because I'm not sure we would maybe be that satisfied unless there was somebody in that position who came to us, who was in an authoritative position. So I just throw that out there. I don't know what's going on there, but I know those searches generally take a little while to find, the right leadership for the organizations, and particularly for with their plans, which are very significant plans. And the change in their leadership obviously, reflected the, moving on to a larger role is pretty significant too. So, I just say that because we can't force them, and I think that's a mistake. But whenever they're ready to engage with us, because again, like you said, their website says they're only open Saturday from 10 to 6.
Well, yeah. I'll just have to say also that I've been in the community board for 2 years. I've been asking for that, and there's been a lot of behind the scene, don't do it, even before this director left. So I feel like, it's kind of like when you're in an environment and suddenly everybody's like, be careful. And you're like, of what? Instead of staying innocent and say, it's part of our community. Let's chat, come over, tell us whatever you want to tell us. Valerie?
Sorry, I was turning off my air conditioner. Hi. We did have Nancy, the former director. She came. We had a joint. We had a joint meeting or a panel about, it was around reopening, and it was of the different arts and institutions and part of reopening. So Robin, who was the former chair of this committee, and I held a joint meeting, and Nancy was a part of that panel. We had the Italian American Museum attend and a variety of other, the Whitney, they were all talking, the Firefighters Museum, and they were all talking about their plans. It was, I think, going right into that September. I think that was in 2020, we did that meeting. So we have had them, we've had someone, their executive director, speak on a panel. I can't hear you.
There's no reason for them to, there's no reason for not us to just like say, hey, after the pandemic, we would like to know, like, are you, you know, they also,
I mean, that's up to you. Yeah, it's up to you and your committee. It was just a general, we kind of started with a purpose, which the purpose was
right,
to find out about the reopening plans for all of the different institutions in the area. And it was a forum for them as well to talk amongst one another. And there was even talk about wanting to organize some sort of art walk afterwards and partner. They were just, everyone was trying to think of really creative ideas coming out of that meeting of how to work together as the city was reopening. So it was, we had a purpose for what we wanted, like why we were engaging. And I think that's maybe what Carter is suggesting is how, you know, if, you know, have a panel of updates or have, you know, a panel of different people you want to hear from, and just as long as there's a kind of a purpose, I guess, for it.
right. Well, the purpose is like people want to know, right? I mean, I get a lot of asks like what's happening, you know, have they spoken to us? It could be us just, you know, a check-in. So I'll figure out a way to invite. I'll be sending emails with dates that for the following, you know, calendars, because we're kind of this group that basically, if there's a spot, they'll they'll give it to us. But you know, so I'll share it with you guys, and if there's any conflicts, let me know. Anything else? Any other things that people are interested to discuss?
I think one thing that we could address at a future meeting is a collective of culturals are getting together to do West Side Day on September 30th. And just if the community board could help promote that, that might be great. It's, you know, it's a range of small and large culturals from like the Whitney to like West Village Rehearsal Space that I'm co-op that I'm involved with, and a whole spectrum of organizations. And it's a one-day thing. So it's just maybe something that we could help promote. I think they want to come talk. I am not the point person on our team who's been interacting with them, but I will check on it, and I'll send you an email, Ivy, to see if they want to come maybe to our next meeting.
Awesome.
It's like a 3-day worth, all these culturals in the district offering free opportunities for our community to engage with the arts.
That's great. Okay, thank you. With that, I think if there's any other, do you have like a link to that, Kristen?
No, we're just in the process of collecting all the information and putting together a website. So I can share that as soon as we've collected everything from everybody. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Okay. Anything else? Or we can have an early, well, not early, get back to dinner. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to save my chat here. Bye-bye. Nice to see everybody.